All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Campfire.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. I always look forward to conversations that are going to forward somebody's effort to live the hero journey and overcome their challenges in life. So let's dive right in because I know through your work you've developed and discovered a lot of wisdom. So I want to talk a little bit about your background.
So it's funny because I went to medical school and went to residency and did additional years in research. I was publishing in academia, so all these journals, and then in 2013, as you can hear in my voice, my body started to fall apart. And I developed a weakness. I didn't know what it was, and initially all I wanted was to get better. And then I was like, well, no, this is not going away anytime soon. So I started to think about people who don't label, people who think outside the box, and that's when I thought about the whys. And then I was like, I have no idea what wisdom is. But I do know how to study something. So I created a project and I created the Wisdom Research Project and I interviewed 60 wise adults across North America. Now, wisdom, in order to do any project, you have to see what's out there in the literature. And so there were some publications in psychology and sociology journals and geriatric journals. They found that wisdom has an inverse U relationship with age. So I interviewed only people who were age 50 to 79. And the literature has also found that wisdom is not different. It doesn't differ based on gender, race, or political affiliation. It is different based on location. And so that's why I select North America. So the wisdom in the Middle East will probably be different than Asia, whatever it may be. So I stuck to North America. And then it was really, and then the literature found that the only people who can identify wisdom were other people, not tests, not questionnaires or surveys or any of that. So that's when I interviewed 60 wise adults. Now, it was really hard to find those 60. I know that people have been like, well, why? Why only 60? I'm like, you have no idea. I spent hours upon hours every week just to find one. And the way it grew was that once I had one, they recommended a few others each one, and it just grew based on that.
There's so much in there that is intriguing because, for one, I can identify with that struggle to get the ball rolling. And then once you do start to actually push the ball a couple of miles, it starts to take up a momentum on its own because you start to find the people that you're looking to speak with. And the other part that really piqued my interest was why that age group.
That's what they found. It's funny because they found that people who are older, like in their 80s or 90s, often lose their flexibility or in their open mindedness. So that's why I stuck to 50 to 79. And I felt like around, so someone was like, well, why 60? And I'm like, well, around 20, I thought I heard a lot of similar things, but being the researcher that I am, I was not happy with 20, so I kept going.
It's interesting because you give a voice to a generation that can teach people that are coming up so much. But
I
those
agree,
people
and I
that
feel like giving a voice was really important to me because the whole book publication process is not easy and it's not cheap. It's very difficult. So I'm so happy that I was able to give them a voice.
well, where I was going with that is the fact that in today's culture, we get so caught up in the tunnel vision of things that we lose the stories because we don't have the time to go and explore that wisdom that the older folks carry. And without that, we're losing so much, not only culture, but skills and techniques that can help us in the daily world.
Well, it's funny because I feel in my book, Common Wisdom, I often say how I feel like wisdom has taken a back seat and it's not important. I think it's also because of the internet and the focus on glitz and glamour and things that people are not, are temporary, are very superficial.
Well, I don't know if it's so much the superficial as it is just the way that we're taught growing up to find distractions. And a lot of those distractions nowadays, we look at the shiny, bright colors or the elaborate meals and vacations that somebody goes on. And that's all we see. So then it becomes our goal in our mind, chase that exact same thing. And we lose a lot of the individuality of a life journey based off of chasing somebody else's goals, forgetting the fact that there's struggles and there's adversities that led to the moments that we see on the internet.
Yeah, I definitely. So, as I said, wisdom was associated with age in an inverse view relationship. So, I think you only sustain those experiences and the struggles you mentioned once you're older.
So, I mean, there's the opportunity for learning as you're going. You can look at somebody that comes before you, somebody that walks the trail of life before you and leaves a story behind. I do that with a lot of the people that I look up to. There's actually one of the quotes that Stoic philosophy was based on was where Zeno went to an oracle and asked him how to obtain happiness in life. And the oracle told him, spend time talking to the dead, meaning pick up a book and read about these people, learn about their lives, learn about their journey. And that's kind of the principles that Project Mindfully Outdoors was founded on. I do that in today's world based off of like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, reading their biographies, getting to intimately know them. And that's something that is very important as you go through life to read the book, read the text. But you've also got to remember that wisdom is a two-sided variable. There's the text that we read, but then there's also the life experience that we enjoy and that we travel through. And when you match them two together, that's where wisdom is truly born.
I know it's funny because it's that a lot of people said, well, you identified in your book, Common Wisdom, you identified the 8 elements of wisdom. How does one start to build them? And let me repeat what they are so people know. So, resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, and curiosity. And if the good thing about breaking it up is you can say what you're good at and what you're not. And when you're not, I think the key to all of that, and you mentioned reading, but I think the key is noticing. The first thing you can do is be like, well, I'm not good at that. How do I? And so just noticing it and observing it and working on it, I think that's a good way to start. So, and that's where what you said of reading and kind of expanding your knowledge base comes in.
It does, and it also gets into a trait that we all have, observation. Whether you're active in the outdoors and you practice the power of sitting next to a tree, especially this time of year where we're rolling into deer season and you're just hunting, you're observing, you're watching the way that things move, the way that they interact, why they respond to how they do. But then again, if you're not an outdoor person and you're sitting on the couch and you're watching TV, you're still utilizing the same skill of observation. You're getting that story just fed you in a different context. And that's where I feel like as you read and you go through life and you gain different experiences, you look back and you observe how you responded to that. That's how you start to really grow. That's how you start to put into practice all this wisdom from the old people.
Right. I mean, it's funny of the people I spoke with, I don't recall them talking about the influence of people older than them, but I'm sure they did.
Well, it's interesting because I actually just did an episode of the podcast recently about this subject and the fact that a lot of the traits that we have at our disposal are inherited. You know, we come through genetically. We end up getting to a point where we struggle with maybe addiction. You can trace your family lines back and see that. And then on the other hand, we also inherit a lot of the positive aspects of life too. We inherit the love of, say, music, the love of a hobby based off of those different traits that are handed down to us.
Yes and no. I mean, I definitely feel like the environment is important. I grew up in the Middle East and or not grew up, I came from the Middle East, and kindness, which was my second element in the book, in the project Common Wisdom, I was something that was never on my radar. Kindness was viewed as a weakness. And it was interesting, the people I spoke with were not only kind to themselves, they were kind to other people. They were kind in bigger acts, like whether it was volunteering or having a nonprofit. So kindness was really important to them, and it was the people they surrounded themselves with. And if you think about it, kindness is it can be taught. It definitely can be. But it was not something I learned and I saw. So I would say it was not on my radar.
Well, that's where the power of creativity that you talked about earlier comes in, because you just touched on something that is so important for people to really be able to hold in their hands. Is the idea that all these different things we talk about and we promote within somebody trying to take a journey to heal or improve their life, all these things are teachable. Just because you don't have them in the moment doesn't mean you can never gain them if you use that creativity inside to learn how to acquire those abilities.
Well, I definitely feel like creativity is important, and as you said, but I also feel like some people do not think they have it in them. And I remind people that to think of who they were as a child and how they had creativity and curiosity. And I definitely feel like it's something we all harbor. It's a matter of whether it's not something that we can, I mean, it's a matter of bringing it back.
It's a matter of stepping outside the label. I mean, it's really that simple. It's like you hear somebody cut you down about something because they give you a label. The label becomes who you think you are, so it blocks your creativity. And if you start to allow yourself space to step away from that label and put it down, you rediscover that childlike curiosity, and it becomes not only okay to embrace it, but it becomes safe and it becomes fun. It fuels the adventure, which leads to that growth piece.
It's funny because it was the labels that led me to do this project. It was having seen all these people wanting to put labels on me, and they didn't know. They just wanted a condition, they wanted a diagnosis. And it was that that led me to look at people who don't do that.
And I think walking the journey is a statement that you can truly agree with, is the fact that labels are a perception that somebody puts on you based on their uncomfortability with something that they see within themselves. It's like when you look into a river. You see the reflection looking back at you. You like it or you don't like it. That defines your perception.
I definitely feel like judgment comes from what your inside. I don't know where the label comes from. I feel like a label also comes from ignorance. And not knowing what something may be and just not, I don't know, just giving a name. So judge when someone judges somebody else, I feel like they're really judging themselves. But when we think about labels, I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
I think to me, especially based off of life experience, the wisdom that I've gained over the years, those labels really hinder the development of the vocabulary that you use for self-talk because you find a worth of a value, whether it's positive or it's negative. What somebody tells you repeatedly becomes the vocabulary that you define yourself with. So when you step outside of those labels and you find the more simplistic ways of existing, you're able to then befriend yourself without all of that outside influence. And I think that that's how somebody grows more self-resilient. That's how somebody grows more self-sustaining. It puts themselves in a position where they can utilize the resources of the wisdom that we're talking about here today.
Yes, and I mean I don't know. I feel like so you're saying people can limit someone's perception of themselves by what they and it's funny because in my book, Common Wisdom, I definitely found that being flexible was really important. And you're saying, well, what if someone is surrounded by someone else who is not that, who labels them as something and they don't think outside the box? I haven't thought about, that's I feel like you're more impressionable when you're a child versus when you're an adult. And that's probably why it's more important to unfortunately grow up a little older and not listen to outside influences, but also realize that what one person may say and do is not the end all be all.
Well, I'm coming from a personal experience where you're in a relationship with somebody who's not the most healthiest person to be with, and it's constantly beaten down with those labels. No matter how firm you feel like you're standing on your feet in the beginning, if you're not authentically clear with yourself and your self vision, those labels, they take up the space that self talk is intended to fill. So that person begins to talk for you. And even after a relationship like that ends, there becomes so much work to be done based off the fact that that voice is still there. So, to bring it back into the context of being self aware, we're not all born from the same shoe where we come into situations in our life, accredited with that skill. Sometimes it takes actually looking inward or looking into a mirror, seeing the reflection and the look in your eyes in order to really come to understand that shift needs to be made. When you start to make that shift and you rewrite that voice, that narrative in your head, that's where tools of wisdom that you read in a book or tools of wisdom that you gain through life experience really become impactful. They really become powerful and they become that jumping off point.
It does. I agree. I think though it's what you're describing is being around. I mean, remember, my third element in my project was positivity. And it sounds like you're saying what happens when someone is around negativity. And if the script in their head gets rewritten into that over and over again, And similar to kindness and positivity, I feel like it's easier said than done, but it takes a lot of practice, and you have to do just noticing it as you realizing that it's there and start working on getting it out of your life. But it sounds like that's what the encounter you had was a lot of negativity.
Well, yeah, I mean, it gets back to the point that, we're all cut from a different cloth, and not all of us are born and raised in an environment of positivity. So that leaves us subject to really learning how to embrace negativity. And that's where, the challenge of rewriting that self-talk is so important to take, because when you look in the mirror, in my case, it just happened to be the rear view mirror of my pickup truck on the first night that I was homeless, and you say to yourself, man, these things aren't working. What I what I perceive as okay clearly isn't. So now I've got to go inward, and I've got to discover a new voice that's going to feel the narrative that's going on in my head. I've got to learn how to transition and do these things on my own, because I didn't have those things growing up. They weren't taught to me. And it doesn't mean we can never acquire new skills, like you said. It just means that for some of us, it's a lot harder road to achieve.
Well, I don't know if you have to have it taught to you. I mean, I'm a very positive person, and I would say I'm an only child, but I would say neither of my parents were very positive. So, and of course not kind, but I would say that neither of them were. It's just not on their radar. Survival was on their radar. So I don't know if it's something you have to be taught. I think it's something that does take practice, as I said, but if you value it, it's something that you can change in yourself.
And that's where looking in that mirror, giving yourself a chance to authentically ask yourself what those values are within you. What is that you want to stand for is so important to do at the beginning of one of these journeys, because you can take it any direction and you decide speak the kind of person you want to be. But regardless of which direction you decide to follow, there's work involved.
Yeah, everything there's work involved. Everything it doesn't come easy, I have to say. And what I found is that's where the whole idea of being mindful comes in. I didn't understand what that was. And I think when I did my project and wrote my book, Common Wisdom, I realized, these 60 wise individuals are mindful about not letting things get to them, are mindful about not being bitter despite having overcome huge obstacles, are mindful about being around people who are kind. So, and I think it takes a lot of like deliberate action, what I would say.
And through that deliberate action becomes understanding and reasoning, changing your perspective. One of the quotes that I really rallied around early on in the process was out of the meditation, where Marcus Aurelius was talking about, he had this almost fear and sadness about becoming the emperor of Rome, because he had seen the effect that it had on everybody, that absolute power had on everybody before him. So he constantly wrote to himself to remind himself that his behaviors, they dye the color of his soul. So if he's acting in anger, that anger becomes who he is. And those are the kind of steps that at least help me to change a lot of the behaviors, the patterns, the talk, and all those things that needed to shift in order to live a life of purpose that really speaks to my values and intentions that are within my heart.
You talked about him as well, he also had a lot of power. And he could have, whatever it was, recognized that he had the power. And despite realizing, oh, he doesn't want to be the oppressor, and he had the power, he can change the narrative. I don't know his history, but we all have that in us. We can all change our narrative. We can all change what we think we're destined to do or what others say we are, and we can change it.
And I think that's a beautiful way to view that story because actually, when he found out that he was in line to be the next emperor, he cried because of seeing the narrative that he was being thrust into. And he worked really hard to change that narrative. He was actually the last of what they called the five great emperors of Rome. And through his life, and especially through the meditations, which was left behind, you see such an active, impressive effort to hold himself accountable, to remind himself of the work that has to be done day in and day out to live those values of your heart.
Interesting. So, so in a way, he viewed it as a setback, but an opportunity too.
It's funny because there's actually a line in there where he looks at it just that way. As you know, it's so unfortunate that all this is happening, meaning the plague, all the wars, and everything else that was going on. And then in the very next line, he goes, no, it's wonderful that all this is happening to me because I have the power, the wisdom, and the ability to come through this, not only unscathed, but ultimately lead the country through all these terminus times. And to me, that was a very revolutionary idea to think about how we go through life and based on our trauma, we take on more of a victim mentality. And then it becomes so easy to transition that into the hero journey mindset.
Yeah, I talk about that in my book, Communism, how we are not victims. And when you think of whatever happens happening for you and not to you, and that outside of like change the narrative, I'm not the victim, I'm the warrior. And I will fight through whatever happens and I will get to the other side. I interviewed a reverend, a Presbyterian, actually, no, a Presbyterian minister. And he talked about how gratitude is what helps you get to the other side. And I agree with him. I think they, at the end of the day, by realizing, okay, I don't want to be a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm a warrior. I'm going to do what I need to do to get to the other side. And if gratitude is it, that may be it.
It's building that gratitude practice is what I'm getting out of that. If you build a gratitude practice that teaches you to change that narrative that we're talking about, and it's
It's not,
based on,
yeah, I
it,
agree. Go ahead.
it's just based off of the simplest little thing. You know, there's a practice that I like to do at least a couple of times in my week where I'll I'll take a page of my journal and I'll just write down 5 to 10 small things that I'm grateful for. Like say I'm grateful that I got a cup of coffee this morning. I'm grateful that my job is what it is. I'm grateful that I get to meet all these challenges and so on and so forth. And by doing that, you do ultimately shift from the darkness of night as you're being your surroundings to the sun comes up in the morning and it feels like a new day.
You know, it's funny because I thought about this. It's not the typical, oh, I'm so happy, I'm so grateful. It starts with a forced appreciation or forced recognition of whatever may be. And you're right, the smallest of things should go in there. but it becomes a habit, and it can change who you are. And it just takes you starting small.
It does. I'm sure you don't know this, but from going from days after a block suicide attempt to where I'm at now, I actually started with surviving an 8 hour day and rewarding myself with a cup of coffee. Just because I wanted to tell myself that I was grateful that I mustered the energy to rise through the day.
Good for you.
And
So you
that
had something to look forward to.
ultimately, yeah. And it's giving ourselves those small things that help us to really rise to the occasion in the long run.
Yeah, it's all the small things. I mean, and that's what gratitude really is. I mean, people are like, oh, or when I thought being grateful meant, oh, it's big things. I'm like, no, it's the tiniest thing. And if you show some gratitude towards your partner, that'll change around your relationship too. So someone was like, why don't you think about 3 things you're grateful for your partner every day? And that'll change around. So I think gratitude is not something that comes easy, but it's something that can definitely change your life.
It definitely can. And as the logs start to burn down here on the fire, I want you to take a minute to do just that. Talk to somebody that comes as if they've come to you. They've heard of the idea of gratitude. They have no idea how to apply it to their lives, but they've got this idea that it's going to be good and useful. Get them started.
It's not only useful, I feel like, as I said, that Presbyterian minister I interviewed talked about how you laugh often and fear not. And he talked about how gratitude was important to him. And I think about it often that laughing is also very important and not taking life or yourself seriously because so many things happen. Life is difficult. And if you take it serious, you just want to be a lighter person and that helps you. So I agree.
I love that. So as we come to a close, you got to let people know how they can get in touch with you, what you got going on, get the book, all that good stuff.
So I initially, to get the 60, I created a website called the wisdomresearchproject.com. And that leads to my website, which is lauragabayan.com, which is a hard name to remember. The book Common Wisdom can be bought on Amazon. And either one of those websites also give you the Amazon link, but Common Wisdom can be purchased on Amazon. And the key is, I had written a lot of very dense and boring manuscripts before, so I definitely made this very easy to read. And I wanted it to be short, to the point, and simple but powerful. And that's what people feel. They can finish it in a few days and they get the insights of 60 other people, which is fascinating.
It's awesome. Well, thank you very much for the conversation and the time today. I don't believe in goodbyes. So until we meet again, whether it's in this life or the next, I wish you a safe and prosperous journey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.